Okay, today I wanted to do a very brief redo of my review of the Hoka Cielo X1 2.0. Came through with some pretty poor lighting last time, so wanted to do a redo, give you my full thoughts, top to bottom, price point comparisons, really quick run through because I think this shoe is still on a few people's minds. Starting off with some specs, this is Hoka's top line marathon racing shoe, sitting as the tallest, most protective marathon shoe in their lineup. We've got a supposed 46 mil of foam in the heel, 39 in the forefoot for a 7 mil drop. So technically speaking, it is sitting above World Athletics regulations, but with this heel bevel, they have managed to sneak it in underneath that 40 mil limit. We have a pretty standard PEBA foam here, resilient, firmer feel, does have a good level of bounce, but not the most kind of out there foam on the market right now. And we have seen a big re-sculpting of the midsole, namely with this medial cutout now instead of the lateral one on the original. Fair few more cutouts, which are reducing the weight by a whole 30 grams down to 230 grams in my men's size 10.5. Quick run through of the upper is that this is now a pretty standard racing shoe upper, a little bit more structure through the heel counter with that nice Achilles flare. The tongue is ungusseted now, which usually is a downgrade, but for myself, I found that it kind of left the foot a little bit more breathability, a bit more comfortable, didn't have that kind of baggy feel of the original. The laces lock down nicely, they stay tied up, big fan of those. The mesh here is much more breathable, much more flexible, much more comfortable on foot for myself, although it isn't offering as much volume in the fit as the outgoing shoe. I would say this is true to size in terms of length, so I've gone for size 10.5, which is pretty much my standard Western running shoe, racing shoe sizing, but I would say it has lost a fair bit of volume, especially through the midfoot and forefoot. If you're someone who enjoyed the old shoe for its high volume fit, this is probably a change that you're going to hate to see. For most people, for standard width feet, this is going to be a racier, more dialed in, more locked down fit. But yeah, for those wide footers who enjoyed the old shoe, this is going to be a little bit snug. Moving down to the midsole, this redo of the geometry of this shoe has made a big difference to the ride. I think this is faster, more aggressive, more useful for running those kind of marathon, half marathon paces for myself. Has a really strong rocker with a bit of a sweet spot sitting in the midfoot of this shoe, and I found it to be a lot more fun for myself. It definitely doesn't have the same stability or kind of presence underfoot that the old shoe had. The medial cutout now I think is going to eliminate it from some people's options with a bit of a kind of squishy, squashy heel and a little bit of a medial bias if you land further back. But for myself, as a supinator, landing in the kind of midfoot, forefoot section of this shoe, I found it to offer a pretty good rebound, nice smooth rocker, nice marathon racing shoe feel. The one complaint I have with this shoe is that it doesn't really reach into those top end speeds. For myself, I found this weird sensation where I couldn't really find the forefoot of this shoe when I wanted to attack 5 and 10K paces. It felt like in order to get up onto the forefoot, I had to really point my toe in order to try and find that front spot because I would always catch this midfoot kind of lump of foam, which is nice at marathon and half marathon pace when you just kind of sit back, let the shoe take you through. But if you're really looking to attack the pace, get that kind of immediate snapback, it almost felt like I was getting drawn into the rocker, kept on the ground for longer than I wanted to, and wasn't really being rewarded by a kind of meaty forefoot like you do in an Adios Pro 4 or an Endorphin Elite 2. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, more of a kind of preference thing in terms of the sensation that I want, but I did think that that forefoot rocker being so extended does mean that you don't get the same substance up front and you don't get that kind of aggressive toe off that you might get with those other shoes. The one that I think about the most is the Endorphin Elite, where you had that really sharp immediate toe off once you got up front. Whereas most of the fun has already happened in the Cielo X by the time you hit this point, and it's actually quite flat if you take that spot in isolation. So for myself, half marathon, marathon paces, I found it to be really consistent, really rhythmic, easy to lock into a pace. And I felt like once you actually got a bit of compression from the foam, the magic really came to it. But yeah, striking up front, I don't think this foam has enough give to it. I don't think that the geometry is really useful for getting right up onto your toes. Maybe the Rockered X2 could be a better pick there, or the Rockered X3 as it's soon going to be. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a preference thing for myself. Marathon shoe, I think it's doing a pretty good job. The other thing I wanted to point out is I don't think that the foam here is the most exciting out there. It is definitely doing its job in terms of having a good deal of protection, a good rebound, good deal of structure, but it's definitely not revolutionizing anything in terms of offering us a really compliant, bouncy, fun experience like some other racing shoes out there. So that might be something that is held against it when comparing it to those shoes. Moving down to the outsole, not a whole lot to talk about here. Full coverage rubber in the forefoot, 2 pods in the heel. I'm not really concerned about this stuff. I'm more concerned about up front, and the grip has been good. Durability so far has been decent as well. We've got about 60 Ks of wear on this pair. Barely looks touched except for maybe a little bit of a line of wear on the outside edge. Grip's been decent in the wet as well, which is a big improvement for Hoka. The one thing I would say though is that those pods of rubber are going to be suspect for a bit of peeling if you're one of those people who does rip up the heel of your shoe. I would say if you're someone who's peeled off rubber pods in the past, might not be one to jump into too quickly, but yeah, if you're landing a little bit further forward and you're confident that you can get a hold of that rubber here, I think you should be okay. I don't think this PEVA foam is the most fragile out there either. I do think it can cop a decent amount of abrasion without kind of disintegrating like Zoom X or some other foams might. But yeah, so far, heel strikers maybe not so much, but mid to forefoot should be pretty good. Getting into the price point here in Australia, $400 I think is maybe a little bit much for what this shoe offers. It's definitely not the worst that I've seen. Like, this is definitely getting into that top tier of marathon racing shoes, in and around the conversation of, you know, top 6 or 7 shoes, which there's a lot that are kind of vying for those positions now, but it's definitely not getting into the top 2 or 3. This is a good racing shoe, has all the components that it needs, but I don't think that it's offering anything exceptional, which would mean that you'd pay $30 or $40 more than an Alpha Fly or an Adios Pro 4 to go for this one. The foam's good, rock is good, but it's not great, it's not amazing. So yeah, that's going to be a bit tricky for Hoka to kind of get past some other brands which are slightly undercutting it for pretty similar levels of performance. In terms of a couple of those comparisons, there's 3 shoes in particular that I want to run through. First is the Wave Rebellion Pro Beta. I find these quite similar in terms of their midfoot kind of sweet spot, midfoot to heel in the Wave Rebellion Pro Beta. Definitely sitting more midfoot in the Cielo X. If you strike into these lumps of foam, you get that nice compression, you get the rebound. Cielo X1 is still more rockered, whereas the Wave Rebellion Pro Beta, despite how it looks, is actually not super rockered up in the forefoot, so it's more of a bounce-based ride compared to the Cielo X, which is encouraging you to kind of use that entire rocker up through the front of the shoe. Both of these shoes I definitely think are more suited to longer range running for me, especially with the compression of both of them, a bit more of a comfort focused ride, but I do think the Wave Rebellion Pro Beta can be useful for running faster because there is a little bit more substance underneath the forefoot, whereas I said with the Cielo X1, bit of a invisible forefoot situation where I couldn't quite find the spot that I wanted to hit in order to hit those 5 and 10K paces. Both are not going to be the most stable. The Wave Rebellion Pro Beta is more unstable than the Cielo X though, so if that's a factor that plays in, you should be leaning the Cielo X1 for a bit more of a consistent feel. Another shoe to compare it to would be the Adidas Adios Pro 4, which is a very popular racing shoe. I feel like the Adios is a little bit bouncier, a little bit more dynamic. I feel like the foam is well integrated into the ride, where you get the kind of compression from the foam, the rockering from the rods, and then that nice pop off the toe from the foam decompressing. With the Cielo X1, I feel like it is more solely based on the rocker, with a little bit of help from the PEVA foam, but I think in general it is just a little bit firmer, a little bit more stiff, and not as kind of fun and dynamic as the Adios. Upper, I'm not leaning either way. I think both of them fit quite nicely. Pretty happy with both of them. In terms of stability in the heel, I don't think either of them are shining particularly, with pretty deformable setups here. So if you're mashing into them, I don't think they're going to be giving you the best structure or the best guidance through the rest of the shoe. But once you get up into the midfoot and forefoot, I think the Adios is just a little bit more stable with a bit more surface area and with a little bit more width through the forefoot, which I think can compensate for this lateral cutout just that little bit better. If you start to tip inwards, I think the forefoot kind of resists that motion a little bit more, whereas with the Cielo X, there's nothing crazy going on to really stop you from continuing on through. So for myself, I think the Adios Pro 4 is a slightly better racing shoe. I think it's a bit faster, a bit bouncier, smidge lighter, coming in at $40 less, it's a pretty stiff competition. I do think the Cielo X would look a lot better if this was sitting at that $370, $380 mark. And then you could argue for firmer feel versus softer, whereas this just feels a lot more fun and dynamic. Final shoe I wanted to mention is the Hoka Mark X2. Very quick mention here because I think this could be a decent replacement for the old Cielo X1 with a bit more structure, a bit more comfort, a bit more protection for those longer races with a little bit of speed as well. Paper foam for the top layer gives a good deal of response, a bit more focus on the forefoot here, whereas you are pushed a little bit further back in the Cielo X1 to take advantage of that foam. And then the rocker, it's much more stable, much more kind of comfortable for longer races. The only real problem with this as a replacement for the original shoe is that it doesn't have that same roomy fit. This is still quite a narrow, dialed in, locked in fit. So yeah, if you had a wide foot and you're wanting that replacement for the Cielo X1, this probably won't be it, but if fit wasn't the problem and you just like the stability, you like the structure, maybe the Mark X2 could be the go. So yeah, overall, the Cielo X1 2.0 for me has been a pretty good racing shoe. I'm pretty happy to put this in that kind of top tier, top 7 or 8 different racing shoes, which are all operating in a similar level of performance. I don't think you're losing anything by going for the Cielo X1 compared to some of the other racing shoes. It's all very small margins now. It's probably not my favorite sensation, as I mentioned, trying to push into those faster 5 and 10K paces without being able to find that forefoot. But as a marathon racing shoe, as a half marathon racing shoe, I'd be pretty happy to race in this and know that I'm going to be getting a good level of performance that is comparable to other brands out there. Maybe a bit steep on the price point. Maybe we could bring that down to make it a little bit more relevant with other brands. But overall, I think this is a good update for myself. Maybe not so much for fans of the original shoe. It does make things a bit tricky in terms of finding that stable, comfortable marathon racing shoe. Hopefully other brands will come out with something which can replace it. But yeah, as far as making a true racing shoe, a bit more elite focused, I think the Cielo X1 2.0 does that.